Hello, my name is Sin Bagley, and I am reading The Skylark of Space by E. Doc Smith in collaboration with Lee Hawkins Garby, and this is Chapter 11. Through Space into the Carboniferous. Seaton opened his eyes and gazed about him wonderingly. Only half unconscious, bruised and sore in every part of his body, he could not at first realize what had happened. Instinctively drawing a deep breath, he coughed and choked as the undiluted oxygen filled his lungs, bringing with it a complete understanding of the situation. Knowing from the lack of any apparent motion that the power had been sufficient to pull the car away from the fatal globe, his thought was for Dorothy, and he tore off his helmet and turned toward her. The force of even that slight movement wafted him gently into the air, where he hung suspended several minutes before his struggles enabled him to clutch a post and draw himself down to the floor. A quick glance around informed him that Dorothy, as well as the others, were still unconscious. Making his way rapidly to her, he placed her face downward upon the floor and began artificial respiration. Very soon he was rewarded by the coughing he had longed to hear. He tore off his helmet and clasped her to his breast in the agony of relief, while she sobbed convulsively upon his shoulder. The first ecstasy of their greeting over, Dorothy started guiltily. "Oh, Dick," she exclaimed, "how about Peggy? You must see how she is." "Never mind," answered Crane's voice cheerfully. "She's coming to nicely." Glancing around, they saw that Crane had already revived the stranger and that Duchesne was not in sight. Dorothy blushed, the vivid wave of color rising to her glorious hair, and hastily disengaged her arms from around her lover's neck, drawing away from him. Seaton, also blushing, dropped his arms, and Dorothy floated away from him, frantically clutching at a brace just beyond reach. "Pull me down, Dick," she called, laughing gaily. Seaton, seizing her instinctively, neglected his own anchorage, and they hung in the air together, while Crane and Margaret, each holding a strap, laughed with unrestrained merriment. "Tweet, tweet, I'm a canary," chuckled Seaton. "Throw us a rope." "A dicky bird, you mean," interposed Dorothy. "I knew that you were a sleight-of-hand expert, Dick, but I did not know that levitation was one of your specialties," remarked Crane with mock gravity. "That is a peculiar pose you're holding now. What are you doing? Sitting on an imaginary pedestal?" "I'll be sitting on your neck if you don't get a wiggle on with that rope," retorted Seaton. But before Crane had time to obey the command, the floating couple had approached close enough to the ceilings so that Seaton, with a slight pressure of his hand against the leather, sent them floating back to the floor within reach of one of the handrails. Seaton made his way to the power plant, lifted in one of the remaining bars, and applied a little power. The Skylark seemed to jump under them. Then it seemed as though they were back on Earth. Everything had its normal weight once more, as the amount of power applied was just enough to equal the acceleration of gravity. After this fact had been explained, Dorothy turned to Margaret. "Now that we are able to act intelligently, the parties should be introduced to each other. Peggy, this is Dr. Dick Seaton, and this is Mr. Martin Crane. Boys, this is Margaret Spencer, a dear friend of mine. These are the boys I've told you so much about, Peggy. Dick knows all about atoms and things. He found out how to make the Skylark go. Martin, who is quite a wonderful inventor, made the engines and things for it." "I might have heard of Mr. Crane," replied Margaret eagerly. "My father was an inventor, and I have heard of him speak of a man named Crane who invented a lot of instruments for airplanes. He used to say that the Crane instruments revolutionized flying. I wonder if you are that Mr. Crane." "That is rather unjustifiably high praise, Miss Spencer," replied Crane, "but as I have been guilty of one or two things along that line, I may be the man he meant." "Pardon me if I seem to change the subject," put in Seaton, "but where's Duchesne?" "We came to at the same time, and he went into the galley to fix up something to eat." "Good for him," exclaimed Dorothy. "I'm simply starved to death. I would have been demanding food long ago, but I have so many aches and pains I didn't realize how hungry I was until you mentioned it. Come on, Piggy, I know where our room is. Let us go powder our noses while these bewhiskered gentlemen reap their beards. Did you bring along any of my clothes, Dick, or did you forget them in the excitement?" "I didn't think anything about clothes, but Martin did. You'll find your whole wardrobe in your room. I'm with you, Dot, on that eating proposition. I'm hungry enough to eat the jam off the floor." After the girls had gone, Seaton and Crane went to their rooms where they exercised vigorously to restore the circulation to their numb bodies. Shaved, bathed, and returned to the saloon, feeling like new men. They found the girls already there, seated at one of the windows. "Hail and greeting," cried Dorothy at sight of them. "I hardly recognized you without your whiskers. Do hurry over here and look out this perfectly wonderful window. Did you ever in your born days see anything like this sight? Now that I'm not scared pea green, I'm enjoying it thoroughly." The two men had joined the girls and peered out into space through the window, which was completely invisible, so clear was the glass. As the foreheads bent so close together, an odd silence fell upon the little group, for the blackness of the interstellar void was not the dark of an earthly night, but the absolute black of the absence of all light, beside which the black of platinum dust is pale and gray, and laid upon this velvet were the jewel stars. They were not the twinkling, scintillating beauties of the earthly sky, but the minute points, so small as to seem dimensionless, yet of dazzling brilliance. Without the interference of the air, their rays met the eye steadily, and much of the effect of comparative distance was lost. All seemed nearer, and there was no hint of familiarity to their arrangement. Like gems thrown upon the darkness, they shone in multicolored beauty upon the daring wanderers, who stood in their cars easily as though they were upon their parent earth, and gazed upon a sight never before seen by eye of man, nor pictured in his imaginings. Through the days of their wonder, a thought smote Seaton like a blow from a fist. His eyes leaped to the instrument board, and he exclaimed, "Look there, Mart, we're heading almost directly away from the Earth, and we must be making billions of miles per second. After we lost consciousness, the attraction of that big dead back there would swing us around, of course, but the bar should have stayed pointed somewhere near Earth as I left it. Do you suppose it could have shifted the gyroscopes?" "It not only could have, it did," replied Crane, returning the bar until it again pointed parallel with the object compass, which bore upon the Earth. "Look at the board. The angle has been changed through nearly half a circumference. We couldn't carry gyroscopes heavy enough to counteract that force." "But they were heavier. Oh, sure, you're right. It's mass, not weight, that counts. But we sure are in one fine, large jam now. Instead of being halfway back to the Earth, where are we anyway?" They made a reading on the object compass, focused upon the Earth. Seaton's face lengthened as seconds passed. When it had come to rest, both men had calculated the distance. "What do you make it, Mart? I'm afraid to tell you my result." 46.27 light centuries, replied Crane calmly. "Right?" "Right, and the time was 11:32 p.m. of Thursday by the chronometer here, there. We'll time it again after a while and see how fast we're traveling. It's a good thing you built the ship's chronometers to stand any kind of stress. My watch is a total loss. Yours is too?" "All of our watches must be broken. We will have to repair them as soon as we get time." "Well, let's eat next. No human being can stand my aching void much longer. How about you, Dot?" "Yes, for cat's sake, let's get busy," she mimicked him gaily. "Dr. Duchesne's had dinner ready for ages, and we're all dying by inches of hunger." The wanderers, battered, bruised, and sore, seated themselves at a folding table, Seaton keeping a watchful eye upon the bar and upon the course, while enjoying Dorothy's presence to the full. Crane and Margaret talked easily, but at intervals, save when directly addressed. Duchesne maintained silence, not the silence of one who knows himself to be an intruder, but the silence of perfect self-sufficiency. The meal over, the girls washed the dishes and busied themselves in the galley. Seaton and Crane made another observation upon the Earth, requesting Duchesne to stay out of the engine room, so they, as they called the partially enclosed space surrounding the main instrument board, where were located the object compasses and the mechanism controlling the attractor, about which Duchesne knew nothing. As they rejoined Duchesne in the main compartment, Seaton said, "Duchesne, we're nearly 5,000 light years away from the Earth, and we are getting farther at the rear of 1 light year per minute. I suppose that it would be poor technique to ask how you know." It would be very poor. Our figures are right. The difficulty is that we have only 4 bars left, enough to stop us and little to spare, but not nearly enough to get back with, even if we could take a chance on drifting straight that far without being swung off, which of course is impossible. That means that we must land somewhere and dig some copper then. Exactly. The first thing to do is to find a place to land. Seaton picked out a distant star in their course and observed it through the spectrosphere. Since it was found to contain copper in notable amounts, all agreed that its planets probably also contain copper. Don't know whether we can stop that soon or not, remarked Seaton as he set the lavers, but we may as well have something to shoot at. We'd better take our regular 12-hour tricks, hadn't we, Mart? It's a wonder we got as far as this without striking another snag. I'll take the first trick at the board. Beat it to bed. Not so fast, Dick, argued Crane as Seaton turned toward the engine room. It's my turn. Flip a nickel, suggested Seaton. Heads, I get it. Crane flipped a coin, heads it was, and the worn-out party went to the rooms, all save Dorothy, who lingered after the others to bid her lover a more intimate good night. Seated beside him, his arm around her and her head upon his shoulder, Dorothy exclaimed, "Oh, Dickie, Dickie, it is wonderful to be with you again. I've lived as many years in last week as we have covered miles." Seaton kissed her with ardor, then turned her fair face up to his and gazed hungrily at every feature. "It sure was awful until we found you, sweetheart girl. Those 2 days at Wilson's were the worst and longest I have ever put in. I could have wrung Martin's cautious old neck." "But isn't he a whiz at preparing for trouble? We sure owe him a lot." Dorothy was silent for a moment, then a smile quirked at one corner of her mouth, and a dimple appeared. Seaton promptly kissed it, whereupon it deepened audaciously. "What are you thinking about? Mischief?" he asked. "Only of how Martin is going to be paid what we owe him," she answered teasingly. "Don't let the debt worry you any." "Spill the news, Reddy," he complained as his arms tightened around her. She stuck out a tiny tip of red tongue at him. "Don't let Peggy find out. He's a millionaire." "Why not?" he asked wonderingly. Then he saw her point and laughed. "You little matchmaker. I don't care. Laugh if you want to. Martin's as nice a man as I know, and Peggy's a real darling. Don't you let slip a word about Martin's money, that's all." "She wouldn't think any less of him, would she?" "Dick, sometimes you're absolutely dumb. It would spoil everything. If she knew he was a millionaire, she would be scared to death. Not of him, of course, but because she would think that he would think that she was chasing him, and then, of course, he would think that she was, see? As it is, she acts perfectly natural, and so does he. Didn't you notice that while we were eating, they talked together for at least 15 minutes about her father's invention, and the way they stole the plans of the one thing and another? I don't believe he was talked that much to any girl except me in the last 5 years. And he wouldn't talk to me until he knew that I couldn't see any man except you. Much as we like Martin, we've got to admit that about him. He's been chased so much that he's wild. If any other girl he knows had talked to him that long, he would have been off to the North Pole or somewhere the next morning. And the best part of it is that he didn't think anything of it." "You think she is domesticating the wild man?" "Now, Dick, don't be foolish. You know what I mean. Martin is a perfect dear, but if she knew that he is the M. Reynolds Crane, everything would be ruined. You know yourself how horribly hard it is to get through a shell to the real Martin underneath. He is lovely, lonely, and miserable inside, I know, and the right kind of girl, one that would treat him right, would make life heaven for him, and herself too." "Yes, and the wrong kind wouldn't make it." "She would," interrupted Dorothy hastily, "but Peggy's the right kind. Wouldn't it be fine to have Martin and Peggy as happy almost as you and I are?" "All right, girlie, I'm with you," he answered, re-embracing her as though he intended never to let her go. "But you'd better go get some sleep. You're all in." Considerably later, when Dorothy had finally gone, Seaton settled himself for the long vigil. Promptly at the end of the 12 hours, Crane appeared, alert of eye and of bearing. "You look fresh as a daisy, Mart. Feeling fit?" "Fit as the proverbial fiddle. I could not have slept any better or longer if I had a week off. 7 hours and a half is a luxury, you know." "All wrong, old top. I need 8 every night, and I'm going to take about 10 this time." "Go to at 12 if you like. You have earned it." Seaton stumbled to his room, slept as though in a trance for 10 hours. Rising, he took his regular morning exercises and went into the saloon. All save Martin was there, but he had eyes only for his sweetheart, who was radiantly beautiful in a dress of deep bronze brown. "Good morning, Dick," she hailed him joyously. "You woke up just in time. We're all starving again, and we're just going to eat without you." "Good morning, everybody. I would like to eat with you, Dottie, but I've got to relieve Martin. How'd it be for you to bring breakfast into the engine room and cheer my solitude, and let Crane eat with the others?" "Fine. That's once you had a good idea, if you never have another." After the meal, Duchesne, who abhorred idleness with all his vigorous nature, took the watches of the party and went upstairs to the shop, which was completely equipped mechanical laboratory to repair them. Seaton stayed at the board, where Dorothy joined him as a matter of course. Crane and Margaret sat down at one of the windows. She told him her story frankly and fully, shuddering with horror as she recalled the awful, helpless fall during which Perkins had met his end. "Dick and I have a heavy score to settle with that Steele crowd and with Duchesne," Crane said slowly. "We have no evidence that will hold in law, but someday Duchesne will overreach himself. We could convict him of abduction now, but the penalty for that is too mild for what he has done. Perkins' death was not murder, then?" "Oh, no, it was purely self-defense. Perkins would have killed him if he could, and he really deserved it. Perkins was a perfect fiend. The doctor, as they call him, is no better, although entirely different. He is utterly heartless and ruthless, so cold and scientific. Do you know him very well?" "We know all about him and more, and yet Dorothy said he saved her life?" "He did from Perkins, but I still think it's because he didn't want Perkins meddling in his affairs. He seems to be the very incarnation of a fixed purpose to advance himself in the world." "That expresses my thoughts exactly, but he slips occasionally, as in this instance, and he will again. He will have to walk very carefully while he's with us. Nothing would please Dick better than an excuse for killing him, and I must admit that I feel very much the same way." "Yes, all of us do, and the way he acts proves what a machine he is. He knows just exactly how far to go and never goes beyond it." They felt the Skylark lurch slightly. "Oh, Mart," called Seaton, "going to pass a star we were headed for. Too fast to stop. I'm giving it a wide berth and picking out another one. There's a big planet a few million miles off in line with a main door, and another one almost dead ahead, that is, straight down. We sure are traveling. Look at the sun flit by." They saw the two planets, one like a small moon, the other like a large star, and saw the strange sun increase rapidly in size as the Skylark flew on in such a pace that any earthly distance would have been covered as soon as it was begun. So appalling was their velocity that the ship was bathed in the light of the sun for only a short time, then was again surrounded by the indescribable darkness. Their 72-hour flight without a pilot had seemed a miracle. Now it seemed entirely possible that they might fly in a straight line for weeks without encountering any obstacle. So vast was the emptiness in comparison with the points of light that punctuated it. Now and then they passed so close to a star that it apparently moved rapidly, but for the most part the silent sentinels stood like distant mountain peaks to the travelers in an express train in the same position for many minutes. Awed by the immensity of the universe, the two at the window were silent, not with the silence of embarrassment, but with that of two friends in the presence of something beyond the reach of words. As they stared out into the infinity, each felt as never before the pitiful smallness of even our whole solar system, and the utter insignificance of human beings and their works. Silently their minds reached out to each other in mutual understanding. Unconsciously, Margaret, half shuddered, moved closer to her companion. The movement attracted his attention, but not her own. A tender expression came into Crane's steady blue eyes as he looked down at the beautiful young woman by his side. For beautiful she undoubtedly was. Untroubled rest and plentiful food had erased the marks of her imprisonment. Dorothy's deep, manifestly unassumed faith in the ability of Seaton and Crane to bring them safely back to Earth had quieted her fears, and a complete costume of Dorothy's simple but well-cut clothes, which fitted her perfectly, in which she looked her best and knew it, had completely restored her self-possession. He quickly glanced away and again gazed at the stars, but now, in addition to the wonders of space, he saw masses of wavy black hair, high piled upon a queenly head, deep down brown eyes half veiled by long black lashes, sweet sensitive lips, a firmly rounded but dimpled chin, and a perfectly formed young body. After a time she drew a deep, tremulous breath. As he turned, her eyes met his in their shadowy depths, still troubled by the mystery of the unknowable. He read her very soul, the soul of a real woman. "I had hoped," said Margaret slowly, "to take a long flight above the clouds, but anything like this never entered my mind. How unbelievably great it is, so much vastness that any perception we could get upon earth. It seems strange that we were ever awed by the sea or the mountain, and yet—" She paused with her lip caught under two white teeth and went on hesitatingly. "Doesn't it seem to you, Mr. Crane, that there is something in man as great as all this? Otherwise, Dorothy and I could not be sailing here in a wonder like the Lark, which you and Dick Seaton have made." Since, from the first, Dorothy had timed her waking hours with those of Seaton, waiting upon him, preparing his meals, and lightening the long hours of his vigils at the board. Margaret took it upon herself to do the same for Crane, but often they assembled in the engine room, and there was much fun and laughter, as well as serious talk among the four. Margaret was quickly accepted as a friend and proved a delightful companion, her wavy jet black hair the only color in the world that could hold its own with Dorothy's auburn glory. Frame features self-reliant and strong, yet of womanly softness, and in this genial atmosphere her quick tongue had a delicate wit and a facility of expression that delighted all three. Dorothy, after the manner of Southern women, became the hostess of this odd party, as she styled it, and unconsciously adopted the attitude of a lady in her own home. Early in their flight, Crane suggested that they should take notes upon the systems of stars through which they were passing. "I know very little of astronomy," he said to Seaton, "but with our telescope, spectroscope, and other instruments, we should be able to take some data that will be of interest to astronomers. Possibly Miss Spencer would be willing to help us?" "Sure," Seaton returned readily. "We'd be idiots to let a chance like this slide. Go to it." Margaret was delighted at the opportunity to help. "Taking notes is the best thing I do," she cried, and called for a pad and pencil. Stationed at the window, they fell to work in earnest. For several hours, Crane took observations, calculated distance, and dictated notes to Margaret. "The stars are wonderfully different," she exclaimed to him once. "That planet, I'm sure, has strange and lovely life upon it. See how its color differs from most of the others we have seen so near. It is rosy and soft like a home fire. I'm sure its people are happy." They fell into a long discussion, laughing a little of their fancies. Were these multitudes of worlds peopled as the earth? Could it be that only upon earth had occurred the right combination for the generation of life, so that the rest of the universe was unpeopled? "It is unthinkable that they are all uninhabited," mused Crane. "There must be life. The beings may not exist in any form with which we are familiar. They may well be fulfilling some purpose in ways so different from ours that we should be unable to understand them at all." Margaret's eyes widened in startled apprehension, but in a moment she shook herself and laughed. "But there's no reason to suppose they would be awful," she remarked, and turned with renewed interest to the window. Thus days went by, and the Skylark passed one solar system after another with a velocity so great that it was impossible to land upon any planet. Margaret's association with Crane began as a duty, soon became an intense pleasure for them both. Taking notes or seated at the board in companionable conversation or sympathetic silence, they compressed into a few days more real companionship than is ordinarily enjoyed in months. Oftener and oftener, as they went on, Crane found the vision of his dream home floating in his head as he steered the Skylark in her meteoric flight, as he strapped himself into his narrow bed. Now, however, the central figure of the vision, instead of being an indistinct blur, was clear and sharply defined, and for her part, more and more was Margaret drawn to the more quiet and unassuming but utterly dependable and steadfast young inventor. With his wide knowledge and his keen, incisive mind, Sometimes, when far from any star, the pilot would desert his post and join the others at meals. Upon one such occasion, Seaton asked, "How's a book on astronomy, O learned ones?" "It will be as interesting as Egyptian hieroglyphics," Margaret replied as she opened her notebook and showed him pages of figures and symbols. "May I see it, Miss Spencer?" asked Shane from across the small table, extending his hand. She looked at him, hot hostility in her brown eyes, and he dropped his hand. "I beg your pardon," he said with amused irony. After the meal, Seaton and Crane held a short consultation, and the former called to the girls, asking them to join the Council of War. There was a moment's silence before Crane said diffidently, "We have been talking about Duchesne, Miss Spencer, trying to decide a very important problem." Seaton smiled in spite of himself as the color again deepened in Margaret's face, and Dorothy laughed outright. "Talk about a red-headed temper. Your hair must be dyed, Pecky." "I know I acted like a naughty child," Margaret said ruefully, "but he makes me perfectly furious and scares me at the same time. A few more remarks like 'I beg your pardon' of his, and I wouldn't have a thought left in my head." Seaton, who had opened his mouth, shut it again ludicrously without saying a word, and Margaret gave him a startled glance. "Now I have said it," she exclaimed. "I am not afraid of him, boys, really. What do you want me to do?" Seaton plunged in. "What are we trying to get up nerve enough to say is that he'd be a good man on the astronomy job," and Crane added quickly, "He doubtlessly knows more about it than I do, and it would be a pity to lose a chance of using him. Besides, Dick and I think it rather dangerous to leave him so much time to himself in which to work up a plan against us." "He's cooking one right now, I'll bet a hat," Seaton put in, and Crane added, "If you are sure that you have no objections, Miss Spencer, we might go below where we can have it dark, and all three of us see what we can make of the stargazing. We are really losing an unusual opportunity." Margaret hid gallantly, and any reluctance she might have felt. "I wouldn't deserve to be here if I can't work with the doctor and hate him at the same time." "Good for you, Peg. You're a regular fellow," Seaton exclaimed. "You're a trump." Finally, the enormous velocity of the cruiser was sufficiently reduced to effect a landing. A copper-bearing sun was located, and a course was laid toward its nearest planet. As the vessel approached its goal, a deep undercurrent of excitement kept all the passengers feverishly occupied. They watched the distant globe grow larger and glowing through the atmosphere more and more clearly as a great disk of white light, and its outlines softened by the air around it. Two satellites were close beside it. Its sun, a great blazing orb a little nearer the planet, looked so great and so hot that Margaret became uneasy. "Is it dangerous to get so close, Dick? We might burn up, mightn't we?" "Not without an atmosphere," he laughed. "Oh," murmured the girl apologetically, "I might have known that." Dropping rapidly into the atmosphere of the planet, they measured its density and analyzed it in apparatus installed for that purpose, finding that its composition was very similar to the Earth's air and that its pressure was not enough greater to be uncomfortable. When within 1,000 feet of the surface, Seaton weighed a 5-pound weight upon a spring balance, finding that it weighed 5.5 pounds, thus ascertaining that the planet was either somewhat larger than the Earth or more dense. The ground was almost hidden by a rank growth of vegetation, but here and there appeared glade-like openings. Seaton glanced at the faces around him. Tense interest marked them all. Dorothy's cheeks were flushed and her eyes shone. She looked at him with awe and pride. "A strange world, Dorothy," he said gravely. "You're not afraid?" "Not with you," she answered. "I am only thrilled with wonder." "Columbus at San Salvador," said Margaret, her eyes paying their tribute of admiration. A dark flush mounted swiftly into Seaton's brown face, and he was sought to throw most of the burden upon Crane, but catching upon his face also a look of praise, almost of tenderness, he quickly turned to the controls. "Man the boats," he ordered an imaginary crew, and Skylark descended rapidly. Landing upon one of the open spaces, they found the ground solid and stepped out. What appeared to be a glade was in reality a rock, or rather a ledge of apparently solid betel, with scarcely a loose fragment to be seen. At one end of the ledge rose a giant tree, wonderfully symmetrical, but of a peculiar form. Its branches were longer at the top than at the bottom, and it possessed broad, dark green leaves, long thorns, and odd, flexible, shoot-like tendrils. It stood as an outpost of the dense vegetation beyond. Totally unlike the forest of verse were those fern-like trees towering 200 feet into the air. They were of an intensely vivid green and stood motionless in the still, hot air of noonday. Not a sign of animal life was to be seen. The whole landscape seemed asleep. The 5 strangers stood near their vessel, conversing in low tones and enjoying the sensation of solid ground beneath their feet. After a few minutes, Duchesne remarked, "This is undoubtedly a newer planet than ours. I should say it's in the Carboniferous age. Aren't those trees like those in the coal measures, Seaton?" "True as time, Blackie. There probably won't be a human race here for ages unless we bring out some colonists." Seaton kicked at one of the loose lumps of metal questioningly with his heavy shoe, finding that it was as immovable as though it were a part of the ledge. Bending over, he found that it required all of his strength to lift it, and he stared at it with an expression of surprise, which turned to amazement as he peered closer. "Duchesne, look at this." Duchesne studied the metal and was shaken out of his habitual taciturnity. "Platinum, by all the little gods." "We'll grab some of this while the grabbing's good," announced Satan, and the 5 visible lumps were rolled into the car. "If we had a pickaxe, we could chop some more off one of these sharp ledges down there." "There's an axe in the shop," replied Duchesne. "I'll go get it. Go ahead. I'll soon be with you." "Keep close together," warned Crane as the 4 moved slowly down the slope. This is none too safe, Dick." "No, it isn't, Mark, but we've got to see whether we can find some copper, and I would like to get some of this stuff, too. I don't think it's platinum. I believe that it is X." As they reached the broken projections, Margaret glanced back over her shoulder and screamed. The others saw that her face was white and her eyes wide with horror, and Seaton instinctively drew the pistol as he turned around, only to check his finger on the trigger and lower his hand. "Nothing but explosive bullets," he growled in disgust, and in helpless silence the 4 watched as unspeakable, hideous monster slowly appeared from behind the Skylark. Its 4 huge, squat legs supported a body at least 100 feet long, pursy and ungainly, at the extremity of a long, sinuous neck. A comparatively small head seemed composed entirely of a cavernous mouth armed with row upon row of carnivorous teeth. Dorothy gaped with terror, and both girls shrank closer to the 2 men, who maintained a baffled silence as the huge beast passed its revolting head along the hull of the vessel. "I dare not shoot, Martin," Seaton whispered. "It would wreck the bus. Have you got any solid bullets?" "No, we must hide behind these small ledges until it goes away," answered Crane, his eyes upon Margaret's colorless face. "You 2 hide behind that one. We will take this one." "Oh, well, it's nothing to worry about anyway. We can kill him as soon as he gets far enough away from the boat," said Seaton, as with Dorothy clinging to him, he dropped behind one of the ledges. Margaret, her staring eyes fixed upon the monster, remained standing until Crane touched her gently and drew her down beside him. "He'll go away soon," his even voice assured her. "We're in no danger." In spite of their predicament, a feeling of happiness flowed through Crane's whole body as he crouched behind the wall of metal with one arm protectingly around Margaret, and he longed to protect her through life as he was protecting her then. Accustomed as he was to dangerous situation, he felt no fear. He felt only a great tenderness for the girl by his side, who had ceased trembling but was still staring wide-eyed at the monster through a crevice. "Scared, Peggy?" he whispered. "Not now, Martin, for what? If you weren't here, I would die of fright." At this reply, his arm tightened involuntarily, but he forced it to relax. "It will not be long," he promised himself shortly, "until she is back at home among her friends." But then came the crack of a rifle from the Skylark. There was an awful roar from the dinosaur, which was quickly silenced by the stream of machine gun bullets. "Blackie's on the job. Let's go," cried Satan, and they raced up the slope, making a detour to avoid the writhing and mutilated mass. They plunged through the open door. Duchesne shut it behind them, and in overwhelming relief the adventurers huddled together as from the wilderness. Without there arose an appalling tumult. The scene, so quiet a few minutes before, was instantly changed. The trees, the swamp, and the air seemed filled with monsters so hideous as to stagger the imagination. Winged lizards of prodigious size hurled through the air, plunging on death against the armored hull. Indescribable flying monsters with feathers like birds, with fangs of tigers, attacked viciously. Dorothy screamed and started back as a scorpion-like thing with a body 10 feet in length leaped at the window in front of her, its terrible sting spraying the glass with venom. As it fell to the ground, a huge spider, if an 8-legged creature with spines instead of hair, many-faceted eyes, and a bloated globular body weighing hundreds of pounds, may be called a spider, leaped upon it, and mighty mandibles against poisonous hundreds of pounds. Poisonous sting, the furious battle raged. Several 12-foot cockroaches climbed nimbly across the fallen timber of the morass and began feeding voraciously upon the body of the dead dinosaur, only to be driven away by another animal, which all three men recognized instantly as the king of all prehistoric creatures, the saber-toothed tiger. This newcomer, a tawny beast towering 15 feet high at the shoulder, had a mouth disproportionate even to his great size, a mouth armed with 4 great tiger teeth more than 3 feet in length. He had barely begun his meal, however, when he was challenged by another nightmare, something apparently halfway between a dinosaur and a crocodile. At the first note, the tiger charged, clawing, striking, rending with each other with their terrible teeth, a veritable avalanche of bloodthirsty rage. The combatants stormed up and down the little island, but the fighters were rudely interrupted, and the earthly visitors discovered that in this primitive world it was not only animal life that was dangerous. The great trees standing on the farthest edge of the island suddenly bent over, lashing out like a snake and grasping both. It transfixed them with terrible thorns, which now seemed to be armed with needle points and to possess barbs like fish hooks. It ripped at them with long branches which were veritable spears. The broad leaves, armed with revolting sucking discs, closed upon the two animals, while the long, slender twigs, each of which was now seen to have an eye at its extremity, waved about, watching each movement of the captives from a safe distance. If the struggle between the animals had been awful, this was titanic. The air was torn by the roars of the reptile, the screams of the great cat, and the shrieks of the tree. The very ground rocked with the ferocity of the conflict. There could be but one result. Soon the tree, having absorbed the two gladiators, resumed its upright position in all its beauty. The members of the little group stared at each other, sick at heart. "This is no place to start a carp mine. I think we'd better beat it," remarked Seaton presently, wiping drops of perspiration from his forehead. "I think so," acquiesced Crane. "We found air and earth-like conditions here. We probably will elsewhere." "Are you all right, Dottie?" asked Seaton. "All right, Dickie," she replied, the color flowing back into her cheeks. "It scared me stiff, and I think I have a lot of white hairs right now, but I wouldn't have missed it for anything." She paused an instant and continued, "Dick, there must be a queer streak of brutality in me, but would you mind blowing up that frightful tree? I wouldn't mind its nature if it were ugly, but look at it. It's so deceptively beautiful. You wouldn't think it had the disposition of a fiend, would you?" A general laugh relieved the nervous tension, and Seaton stepped impulsively toward Duchesne with his hand outstretched. "You've squared your account, Blackie. Say the word and the war's all off." Duchesne ignored the hand and glanced coldly at the group of eager, friendly faces. "Don't be sentimental," he remarked evenly as he turned away to his room. "Emotional scenes pain me. I gave my word to act as one of the party." "Well, may I be kicked to death by little red spiders," exclaimed Seaton, dumbfounded, as the other disappeared. "He ain't a man. He's a fish." "He's a machine. I always thought so. Now I know it," stated Margaret, and the others nodded agreement. "Well, We'll sure pull his cork as soon as we get back, snapped Seaton. He asked for it, and we'll give him both barrels. I know I acted the fool out there, Margaret apologized, flushing hotly and looking at Crane. I don't know what made me act so stupid. I used to have a little nerve. You're a regular little brick, Peg, Seaton returned instantly. Both you girls are all to the good, the right kind to have along in ticklish places. Crane held out his steady hand and took Margaret's in a warm clasp. For a girl in your weekend condition, you were wonderful. You have no reason to reproach yourself. Tears filled the dark eyes, but were held back bravely. She held her head erect and returned the pressure of his hand. Just so you don't leave me behind next time, she returned lightly, and the last word concerning the incident had been said. Seaton applied the power, and soon they were approaching another planet, which was surrounded by dense fog. Descending slowly, they found it to be a mass of boiling hot steam and rank vapors under enormous pressure. The next planet they found to have a clear atmosphere, but the ground had a peculiar barren look, and analysis of the gaseous envelope proved it to be composed almost entirely of chlorine. No life of an earthly type could be possible upon such a world, and a search for copper, even with the suits and helmets, would probably be fruitless, if not impossible. Well, remarked Seaton as they were again in space, we've got enough copper to visit several more worlds, several more solar systems if necessary, but there's a nice, hopeful-looking planet right to the front of us. It may be the one we're looking for. Arrived in the belt of atmosphere, they tested it as before and found it satisfactory. And that is the end of chapter 11.